Number 1. This happened when I was about 13 years old. One weekend, my parents and I were out of town for work, so I was staying with a friend who lived across the street. Every morning I would wake up and go let the dogs out, feed them, and clean the litter box. Then my friend and I would go play for the rest of the day, sporadically checking on the house. One morning my friend and I woke up very early, still dark out, and looked across the street at my house. Our electric garage kept opening and closing all by itself, constantly. And one of my dogs runs out of the garage. I ran out and grabbed the dog. Then we watched the house for about 5 minutes before we decided to walk across the street to check on it. Thinking it was a glitch, we walk into the garage where I push the button to make it stop. Now, to explain my house, you walk into an entryway, and then the house is split level. You can go upstairs or downstairs. We walk upstairs, flipping on the lights and looking around, and there's nothing. Then we began to walk downstairs towards the basement. As I flip on the stairwell light, which has a dimmer on it, we see a shadow on the wall quickly move away from the bottom of the staircase towards the other side of the basement. My friend and I freak out and run out of the back door to my friend's house, where we wake her parents, who call the cops. They come and search the house. Nothing inside. However, they do find footprints in the snow all over the back deck, which wasn't shoveled, and the back door was found unlocked. Nothing was missing as far as we could tell, so I cannot imagine what he wanted. I didn't step foot into the house again until my parents came back home, and even then, I basically had to be bribed, not to mention my room was down in the basement. I slept in my parents' room for 2 weeks after that. Kind of funny thinking back on it. A teenager sleeping on the floor of their parents' bedroom. Number 2. When I was a kid, I was living with my grandma in an apartment complex in a very poor area. It was a really bad neighborhood, but my granny and I were living in the nicer part, which really isn't saying much. The apartment complex was really small, 3 floors and 12 apartments all in all. But as the neighborhood wasn't exactly friendly, neither were the neighbors. We hardly knew anyone in the complex. People were constantly moving in and out before you even had a chance at saying hello. But then again, the few people we did say hello to were either creeps or criminals. I don't think we were missing out on much. The complex had a huge basement, and each apartment had their own room in the basement. The basement also had a laundry room. The entire basement was creepy as fuck, but it was really quiet down there, most of the time. But anything going on in the complex would eventually manifest into sounds in the basement. On top of that, the heater, which was also down there too, was always making this sound like a dying cat, and every pipe and floorboard down there was really creaky. As a young child, my granny didn't allow me to go down there on my own. Not that I ever wanted to. Even before this particular incident, plenty of bad stuff had happened down there. People would often use the basement for illegal activities or to store drugs. A lot of people would move away without cleaning out their rooms, leaving behind the stuff to be found by the landlord. One time the landlord found a meth lab. Another time he found a batch of dead dogs, which apparently had been alive when the resident of the room had been living in the complex, but had starved to death once he had moved out. Anyways, I was 14 when I was first allowed down in the basement on my own. My grandma was getting old, and I was taking over more and more responsibilities at home. Doing laundry was always my biggest terror. Yet as time went by, I got more used to the sounds and the creaks down there. The basement was just a tiny bit less creepy. When I was 15, my grandma had won a new dining room table. Being the old-fashioned hoarder she was, she didn't want to part with her old set. Instead, she wanted it down in our basement room, which of course rested on my shoulders. I went down to our basement with a few chairs, and then into our room. That was when I first heard the noise. The reason I noticed it was that it was unlike any of the noises I usually heard down there. It was repetitive and seemed to have a pattern to it, not like the other noises, which seemed to be random. The noise was strong in our room, but not outside of it, like someone was knocking on the walls in the room next to ours. I put my ear to the wall, trying to figure out where the noise was coming from. I remember thinking that perhaps it was rats or pests running around inside the walls. Like that, the pattern was even more obvious. 3 short knocks, then 3 long knocks, followed by 3 more short knocks. I immediately had the feeling like I heard that pattern before, but couldn't quite put my finger on why. I went back up to my grandma and asked her about it. She reminded me that it was Morse code for SOS, which she had taught me a long time ago. I told her I heard it down in the basement, and she went down there with me to investigate. When she heard it too, she called the police. Well, the police showed up with the landlord, then had each resident open their basement room. The residents that weren't home or otherwise unavailable had their basement rooms kicked open. In one of the rooms, the police found one of those big old-fashioned closets. Think of the one from the first Narnia movie. Inside they found a young woman who had been abused, starved, and pretty much tortured. The owner of the room was an elderly man who was living in the apartment above ours. As it turns out, she had been down there for at least 5 days, and while a lot of other people had apparently heard the noise, no one else had recognized it as an SOS signal. Number 3. I'm a male, and I was 22 when this story occurred. The encounter happened when I moved back to my hometown after graduating. At first, I had moved back in with my parents until I found a job. At first, it was great seeing more of my parents, as I hadn't seen them much studying in a different city. But the novelty soon started to wear off, and I was missing the independence I had living in my own apartment when I was away. I found a job a few months after and decided I was going to find my own place and regain my independence. I began searching online and was looking at both letting agencies and private landlords, scoping around for places that were within my budget. I had gone for a few viewings that I turned down, as they weren't what I was looking for. This is when it happened. I came across an ad online for a place with a great location within my budget. The ad had contact details for Alan, with a standard-looking email address. I emailed Alan and found out the place is still available. I'm psyched and arranged a viewing. Alan doesn't work or live in the town and won't be able to meet me before 7 p.m. No problem. We can both do it the next night. So I show up to the address. It looks just like the photos from the outside. I'm getting more and more excited, and I can't believe my luck. I knock on the door, and a large man opens. I'm 6'1", 190 pounds, and this guy was towering over me, easily 6'4". He almost looks disappointed as he extends his hand. I'm Andy. The name was Alan on the ad. Not a red flag yet. Could just be he doesn't like advertising his real name. As I shake his hand, I say my name. He responds, "I thought you would be a girl. I have a unisex name." At this point, I'm assuming he prefers girls, as they tend to be tidier than guys. I say, "Don't worry, I'm quite OCD with my living space. I like to keep it clean." He just sort of nods, still looking disappointed, but as if he's trying to hide it. He seems uninterested as he shows me around the place. I actually really love it so far, but anytime I show my interest, he seems to be trying to put me off. For example, I said I love the big windows, and he responds with telling me that they can be drafty sometimes, just small things like that. I'm still brushing this off as him thinking I won't be as clean as a female tenant. We finish looking around the place and I tell him I'm really interested in renting, but first, I want to see the basement. It was advertised with spacious basement in the listing. He then states that there is no basement. I just look at him confused and point out it's stated on the ad. and there's a door in the apartment that he didn't open during the tour, which I'm assuming is the basement entrance. He's beginning to act a bit sketchy and says he's reconsidering including the basement and that he might be just using it for storage instead. The basement was a big positive for me on the ad, as I pictured man caving it or throwing parties down there with friends. As the apartment is in my budget, I say I would really like to see the basement, and if I liked it, we could possibly work something out, like me paying more to include the space with the rent. He seems unsure, but as I'm being adamant, he finally relents and says he will show me, but first he has to go down and tidy up. At this point, I'm reconsidering hanging around, as it seems like a red flag, but at the same time, he said he was going to use it for storage, so I figured it might be a bit messy down there. So I decide to wait. Andy disappears into the dark basement. I'm waiting for a light to flicker on when he reaches the bottom of the stairs, but it stays dark, and I hear some shuffling around for a minute or so, and then the light comes on, and he shouts up that I can come down. I begin to get this really uneasy feeling, and I'm considering leaving, but I brush it off because I do still really dig this apartment. I head down the stairs and reach the turn near the bottom, when Andy perks up. "Watch your feet." That's when I look down and notice it. There's a thin line of that plastic kind of clear wire stretched across the stairs. You know, the kind that's used for washing lines. It runs across about ankle height, right before the bend, and tied around the ends and secured by screws. He sees the what the fuck look on my face and quickly chimes in that the last tenant had a dog and he painted models or something down there. The wire was there to keep the dog out, and he hasn't had a chance to remove it yet. Pretty flimsy excuse, considering the ad said no pets. I'm thinking the only reason he didn't remove it was because I was at the top of the stairs and I would have seen. Obviously at this point alarm bells are ringing, so I don't wander far from the bottom of the stairs. Andy says, "Well, here it is," and a minute later is quickly trying to usher me back up the stairs. Relieved, all I see down there is boxes and a tied up bin liner. Typical storage stuff. No weird smell or anything. Just a normal looking basement. But then I notice it in the corner, just as I turn to go back upstairs. There's an old mattress poorly propped up in the far corner, with a sheet covering it, but you can see the bottom corner, and it's clear what it is. It looked like he tried to hide it with a sheet, but couldn't see in the dark. We head back upstairs, me leading, and I remember to step over the wire. Andy immediately closes the door. "We'll get in touch if you want the place, and maybe we can work something out with the basement." He's acting super sketchy at this point, and I can tell he wants me out right away. So I say, "Sure, it's a lovely place. I'll be in touch. Nice meeting you." Then I'm quickly ushered out. I called my best friend when I left and told him what happened, and that Andy might be planning on luring a girl down there and tripping her on the stairs to do God knows what. He says maybe I'm being paranoid, but it does sound sketchy as fuck. I decide better safe than sorry and call the police station on the non-emergency number and explain to them what happened. The police thank me and say they'll check it out, but they really don't sound sincere. I expect to hear a follow-up. I called back about a week later to inquire, and they told me they can't release any information. But I keep an eye on the local news, and nothing comes up that sounds like Andy. The ad did get removed the next day though. Maybe I put him off the idea. Maybe it was me being paranoid, and maybe there was nothing malicious afoot, or maybe Andy followed through with his plan and was never caught.
There's always a reason to be afraid.